everyone, I'm Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach and developmental editor. I help writers start, finish, and get their books out into the world. I'm also host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for novelists and memoir writers who have finished or almost finished manuscripts and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. If you want to learn more about the ways that I support writers, there are links in my comments section to find out more. All right, so every week I look forward to answering a question from a client, a member of my group coaching program, or newsletter subscribers about anything related to writing, publishing, or editing. If you have a question you would like to ask, stick it in the comments section and I will do my best to answer it. So today's question comes from Bernadette, and it's a really good one. Bernadette asks, how do you balance telling and showing to avoid being over descriptive in your writing? I love this question. Thank you so much, Bernadette, because writers ask me this one all the time. It's really fundamental to the whole writing process. So this is going to be good. Let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So let's begin by first defining these terms, telling and showing. What do we mean about that when it comes to writing your book? Telling, simply put, is summarizing. It's summarizing it or providing information. And we have an example here of what that might look like in your novel or memoir. Anne could see she'd hurt him, and she knew her husband was owed an explanation, but she was too tired, and so she simply left the room. So in this example, we have a very clear understanding of what has just happened. There's been some kind of an argument or unfortunate realization. Anne is conscious of the consequences of this, but she's not going to do much about it. She's exhausted. Those facts are laid out for us very plainly and clearly. There's no ambiguity, and we are ready to move on to the next bit of information in this story. Now let's see what that looks like when we show instead. Showing describes actions and events in detail. It's like watching a movie and seeing that moment unfold in front of your eyes. Let's look at how the same moment appears when we show it instead of tell it. Her husband's eyes showed his disappointment. Anne felt her shoulders drop, every ounce of energy drained from her. To avoid his pained expression, she closed her eyes. It was a relief not to see him there. I'm sorry, Jack. The tension in the air was palpable. Their dog Mo began to whimper. There was so much she knew she ought to say, but she'd traveled the same road so many times before. She did not look at him. Instead, she picked up her book and told him she was going outside. This is no better or no worse than our telling example. It's just different, and it has a different purpose in the story. In this example, we are given a lot more information that we are going to use to connect the dots ourselves as readers. We have physical details. We have how her husband's eyes looked. We have how Anne's shoulders drop. We can feel the pain in the room. We have some sensory details. We hear the dog whimper, so we can feel that tension by hearing what's happening in that room. And finally, we have this really rich, textured example of interiority. Interiority is what's happening on the inside of your character as a result of the experience that they're having on the surface. So we're getting into her head. We know that she is conscious that there are things she should say to her husband, but that she's just tired of having the same conversation over and over again. And then finally, we see those consequences of her decision to not engage with this conversation. So we've heard that expression, show, don't tell, 100 times before. It's pithy, it's cute, it seems to convey some important advice, but actually, we really need to deconstruct it. It's actually plagued with problems because showing and telling are both really valuable tools. They're just different, they don't do the same thing. And so it's our job as writers to figure out how to balance the use of both of these tools, how to know when to use telling and when to use showing. And that's what we're going to look at next. In my first example, you could see that that text was much shorter than the second example, which contains several paragraphs. That's because telling is very efficient. It's summary after all. So we don't get into all the details, all the feelings, all the visual and audible details. We're simply giving that information and in very succinct packaging. And that can be very helpful when you want to be conscious of controlling your pacing. So, for example, if you've just had a scene that's loaded with interiority, we've been in that character's head for a while, or it's a very action packed, highly visual scene where we've seen every single moment unfold, it's time to pull back a little bit and move your story forward to a new place so that your story doesn't get tiresome, so that the momentum continues. And that's a great instant to put in some telling. Telling is a way to relay information efficiently. Sometimes there's some information that you want your reader to know, but it's not worthy of lingering over for a long period of time. Let's say that it was significant that your character was very financially comfortable, but it didn't really matter what your client or what your character, sorry, what your character did for a living. In that case, it suffices to say that your character was a doctor. And then we can imagine, okay, this is a highly educated person. They probably work some pretty long hours, and materially, they're comfortable. Let's get into the story. This is a way you can relay any kind of information like this quickly, efficiently, so that you can get to the heart of your story. And finally, it's a great way to transition between scenes. Let's think about Anne again. Let's say that after she walked out of the room, instead of going to the backyard with her book, she decided she was going to clear her head and go to a cafe in town. And maybe we know that when she gets to that cafe, she's going to meet an old partner. Something is going to happen that is important to moving the plot along. But in the meantime, moving from the kitchen table to the car to the parking lot to the cafe is not where the action's at. It's not where the big thoughts are happening. We just need to know that she gets from one place to another. And so it's enough in a couple sentences to describe that. We don't need to see every single detail that takes her from the kitchen table to the cafe. And so this would be an example where telling would be a useful tool. Now let's look at where showing is the optimal tool. Showing brings your character right into the scene with you, right into the scene beside your character so that they can feel the emotional impact of whatever it is that's happening. So if you want your reader to be on the mountaintop with your character, do some showing. If you want them to feel all those feelings that transpire between Anne and her husband, again, showing is the appropriate method. Interiority is what makes your character come alive and have depth and emotional resonance. Interiority is what your character is feeling on the inside, and showing is the tool we use to provide interiority. When we got a look at why Anne decided not to engage with her husband's conversation, when we had that line about they'd been through this 100 times before, the conversation, there was no place for the conversation to go. That is interiority that helps us understand why our character is behaving the way they are. And when it's really fleshed out in a well-developed showing moment, we can understand that better. And finally, showing is what you do to show a pivotal scene. Showing indicates to the reader, stop here and really pay attention. Something is going to happen that is going to change the trajectory of this story. So let's go back to Anne again, and let's remember she's headed to the coffee shop. In our telling example, we decided that what happened between the kitchen table and her journey to the cafe wasn't that important. Where the juicy stuff was going to happen was at the cafe when she ran into somebody important. But now let's play with that a little bit. Let's imagine that instead, the pivotal moment is when she starts driving that car. Let's imagine that Anne really shouldn't have stepped into that car. She was feeling too much emotion. There was too much of that internal conflict happening, and her eyes weren't focused on the road, and she gets in a terrible accident instead. Well, suddenly telling isn't going to suffice. We need to see what happened. We need to see how it happened, what happened, and the final outcome for Anne in that moment. So here's an example of where showing is important because it's a pivotal scene. So now you've seen that showing and telling are of equal importance, but they have very different functions in your story. Using the criteria that I've just provided can help you make a checklist so you can decide if your scene would be better off, and not your scene, if your information would be better off in a showing, um, with showing or with telling. I hope this was helpful. Please stick any questions in the comments section below. And if you liked this video and would like more of the same, please subscribe to my channel. I'd be grateful. Thanks.